Good evening, I should say. Hold on. Nor my hair. Well, I could also say good night, I guess. But hello, I just wanted to sit with you guys and talk about the books that I read in March. I just got this new tea. It's like peach with chamomile and white tea and honey. I haven't had it yet, but I'm really excited to try it. I didn't add any sweetener because I was assuming that like it might be sweet enough. And also like, I know this is a very simple mug, but I really like it. I don't know why, it's just like the height is perfect for me and the shape. I don't know how to explain it, but if you see me sniffing at it, it's because it smells really good. This month, surprisingly, and I think this is the first time this has happened in a really long time, this month I only read books that I owned physically. So even though I listened to some of these as audiobooks, they were only books that I actually owned. Yeah, I'm really happy with the books that I read. And even though it was like I read less this month than like January and February, I feel like I retained more. So this is also kind of an argument for like reading slowly but deliberately, but we'll get into it. We're just gonna start with like, I'll just give you guys a summary of the books. Some of them have like big spoilers, so I will warn you when I am about to go into spoiler territory just in case, but I really want to like talk about the spoilers and like basically go into the nitty-gritty of some of these books because again, I had such a brilliant time with them and I just have so many thoughts and I really want to talk to you guys about them. These are the 5 books that I read in March. Let's see. So 2 of them, these 2 I read as an audiobook and these 3 I read physically, like I read the physical copy. I like to talk about the format that I like use to consume the books that I read typically because I think that like audiobooks tend to have like they do. Audiobooks have like an added layer to them, right? Which is that like how much you dislike or like the book is going to in part depend on how well the narrator narrates the book. So I've had experiences where like the narrator did a really bad job and it caused me to like dislike the book. Alternatively, I've had instances where like the narrator did such a good job that I liked the book more. So I think it's helpful to like know in what format I read them in, just in case like that also informs my impression and like my feelings towards the book. We're gonna start with the books that I read via audiobook just because I think that's gonna be easier. And also like, yeah, let's just start with audiobook. First book that we're going to talk about is Secrets of Divine Love by a halwa. This is like a very spiritual, religious book, which I don't usually read, but it was the month of Ramadan, so I wanted to consume something like faith-based, but I also don't really like books that are very like, if you do this, you will go to hell. If you do that, you will go to heaven. Like, I don't like books like that. What drew me to this book in the first place was because I'd heard a lot of people talking about how it has such an emphasis on love and your individual connection to God. And instead of telling you like, you should do these things to go to heaven and you should not do these things to go to hell, and like instead of it being about the technicalities like of religion, it's about the like spiritual aspect of it. And yeah, I just that's what I was drawn to for this book. I think that like this is a book that would be useful to most people. It doesn't matter like if you're even religious or not. I think it's like, for me, it was just about like the emphasis of love in life, and specifically in this instance like divine love. But like I think a lot of the things that she talks about in this book are applicable even if you don't believe in a god. So I really enjoyed this and hope to kind of revisit it throughout my life, probably, especially during Ramadan. So don't have much to say about this because again, I don't read very many like religious books and I am not interested in like talking about religion that much, if that makes sense. So, but yeah, that's just one of the books that I read. I listened to this on audiobook. The author herself reads it and it was really like, it did what I needed it to do for the month. and beyond that. So that's that. Now we have 2 books by the same author. If you watched my reading vlog, you will see that I literally love this author so much. I was so excited. So here's my little confession, is that even though I literally love the Ember in the Ashes series, I actually have never read the final book in that series. And I don't know why exactly. I think that like I think that I just got really stressed out because the 2 characters, Elias and Laia, that I like really was rooting for, were just really going through it, and I was just like, I cannot do this anymore. So I actually never finished that series. I read the first 3, I never read the 4th one, which now I'm like, I should go back and read the 4th one. But I did end up picking up Heir. So this book was actually gifted to me by one of my best friends and for my birthday. And first of all, I think this is such a pretty cover. Like, that is such a beautiful book cover, and the colors are just like screaming at me. I listened to it on audiobook, and the narrators did a fantastic job. There's literally like a cast of narrators that like added so much to the story and gave voice to characters, like beyond the characters already having a voice of their own in text. But I think the added layer of having more than one narrator to narrate each of the POV characters in this book, it was just, I'm so excited for the next book. Like, I actually am so excited for the next book. And seeing like characters that I love so much, like Helene and Laia and Elias in this book, was just, I was screaming. I actually really had a good time with this. Don't have too many thoughts. I read this at the beginning of the month, so I feel like I don't remember as much as I should about this, but I really enjoyed this. Love the characters. Saoirse and Quill are my favorites. They are my favorites. And I really hated Aiz. From the beginning, I hated that girl. Okay, that's all I'm gonna say about this, is like, I really hate Aiz so much, and I didn't like her from the beginning. Anyway, that's all I'm gonna say about Heir. Really recommend this if you've read the Ember in the Ashes series. I don't know, like, I think Saboteur does a great job setting it up so that even if you haven't read the original series, you'll get what's going on. But I think having read that added so much to my experience, especially having read that like 6-7 years ago. So while we're here, we're also going to talk about All My Rage by Saboteur. Okay, so I obviously, because Saboteur has never written or like published, I don't know, written, but she's never published like a book that was contemporary literature, like real life, not fantasy ever. And so this was like her first contemporary novel, right? And I loved this story so much. So just to give you guys a warning, I am going to go into spoiler territory here. So if you don't want to be spoiled about anything, you don't want to know anything about the book, I recommend skipping ahead to the next book, which will be Never Let Me Go. But that one's also going to be spoiled, so if you haven't read that one. Anyway, so this book follows Salahuddin, Noor, and Misbah mainly. Those are like the 3 main characters, and they're also the 3 characters that you get a POV from. There are trigger warnings for this book, so I highly recommend, like, if you want to and you need to, like, look at the trigger warnings. I love the way that it's set up, because it tells you that there's trigger warnings, but they're on the next page at the bottom. So unless you want to seek them out, you can. Otherwise, you just like find out and you read. This book was so filled with grief, and I talked about this in my reading vlog, which I'll like link, but during that reading vlog, I didn't want to get into the like the nitty gritty of it, because I was worried that, like, I don't know, I think I needed time to like sit down and ruminate on this more. But basically, you start with Misbah's marriage, and that Misbah is actually Sal's mom, and she has been going through like kidney failure, and so she like dies really early on in the novel, which I was not expecting. I felt so sad, like I could feel Sal's sadness and his desperation, and it really puts into perspective like everything else that goes on. And then with Noor, like her whole situation is that when she was like very, very young, her family's like house was destroyed and she was like stuck under the rubble, and her uncle, who's Chachu in the book, he like saved her and he brought her to America. Basically, this is like their backstories and also like things that happened early on in the novel, which set up for like what's gonna happen next. Noor has applied to 7, I think, was it 7 universities? I don't know why that number is coming to me. I don't think it was 7, but Noor has applied to a few universities because she really wants to get out of, what was the place called? Oh my god, not me forgetting. Oh, Juniper. Yeah, okay. Noor's whole goal is that she wants to get into university so that she can leave Juniper. She's also so smart, so she absolutely could. She does struggle with writing essays, which I thought was such a sweet touch because Sal is a writer and like their friendship is like so cute, and also like he helps her write her essays and stuff, and like he reads through her essays. Anyway, the whole setup is that Misbah passes away and Sal feels like the overwhelming stress of having to or wanting to keep up the motel after she passes away, because he views it as like being her last like living dream. And so while he is like trying to stay afloat, essentially, he wants to stay in Juniper and Noor wants to leave. She wants to go to university. And the characters end up like going, like throughout the narrative, you don't entirely get what's going on. The thing that I was really surprised about was that I didn't catch on to Noor's situation at all. And I think that like that was so expertly done, because the way that like Sabaa Tahir addresses the, like there's trigger warnings, but like the abuse that Noor is going through is so well crafted. Like I couldn't believe it after the reveal, because I was just like, wow, what an incredible way of depicting like the victim, which in this case was Noor, like getting into their heads as they're being actively harmed. Also, it was just so heartbreaking. And then with Sal too, like over the course of the novel, you're unraveling why he like hates touch, and he is so sensitive and like to people touching him. And like it was just so expertly crafted. And I say that also because I've read like a lot, obviously I've read a bunch of books, but like I've read many novels in which there's like sexual assault or there's abuse, and sometimes like they get super graphic, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily, but I think that like sometimes it can give like a voyeuristic edge or a voyeuristic perspective to that like tragic thing that's going on in the book. Like as the reader, you're like reading these really horrific things happening to the characters, which like, yeah, it's fiction, but ultimately it's like horrifying, and it's also based in reality. Like these things happen in reality. And I think that the way that Sabaa addressed it in this novel and how she goes about showing you but not showing you was just so well done. So to get into details, like I already warned you guys about spoilers, but I always worry that people just don't think I'm gonna go into spoilers and then they get spoiled. But essentially, like every time Noor is being abused by her uncle, she just keeps repeating like, Chachu saved me, he brought me to America, he gave me these opportunities, like every single time. And I remember when I was reading these, I was like, oh my god, like why does she keep repeating this to herself? And my impression initially, before finding out that this was like her thoughts as he was actively like abusing her, I thought that she was just like reminding herself over and over and over again. And then later you realize that like no, every single instance in which that like she was saying that to herself was an instance where he was literally physically harming her, which is just like so, because even as she was telling herself this, like a part of me was breaking, because I was just like, yeah, he did this, but you don't owe him like for the rest of it, like you don't owe him your future just because of that. Because the whole thing also is that like her uncle is literally getting like free labor from her, having her work at his like little liquor store, and while he's taking college classes, and he doesn't want her to apply to universities and like all of that. It was just really that's what I'm saying, is like this was so heartbreaking. This was so heartbreaking. And then with Sal, like Sal is trying really hard. Like his dad, also I didn't mention this earlier, but his dad is an alcoholic. Like he's struggling with alcoholism. And so he, after his mom passes away, like he genuinely doesn't know what he's going to do with himself anymore because he needs money. But he's like, they're literally high school kids, and he needs like thousands of dollars to save his mom's motel. And so he ends up getting into like drugs and selling drugs, and like I'm gonna cry. It was just so heartbreaking. Like this whole thing was so heartbreaking. And I think that what was done so well is that like, even though it's so heartbreaking, like you can feel the hope of the characters and how much they like love each other. Like, cause they're like best friends from childhood. And like the narrative like describes how they met each other when they were little, and they only understood each other because like most of the other people in their town, and most of the people in their town growing up were like white people, so they didn't really relate to them. And that's the hope there, I think, is that their connection is so strong. Towards the end, like Sal and Noor are like in the car and they get stopped by cops, and then the drugs are discovered, and basically this leads to them both being accused of like selling drugs and distribution and stuff. And Sal basically does everything so that Noor can go to college, even though it's like it is his fault and he's responsible for what he did. But like just that effort that he goes through to make sure that like she finds out that she got into university, because like at that point she's gotten rejected from all of them except for one who she's not gotten a response for. And like you know like that at the end she's gonna have gotten into university, even though I was a little bit scared for a second there. But it was just so beautiful. Like this was such a beautiful novel. I think I'm gonna leave it at that because I already like touched on a lot of the different like plot points that like, I don't know, this book stuck in my mind, and I think it will stay in my mind because it was so beautiful. So that is All My Rage by Sabotage. This is actually kind of good. We only have 2 more books to talk about. The next one that we're going to discuss is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. I also read this predominantly like the book itself. You can probably tell that like the little lines or whatever, I didn't want it to bend, but I also was like, I had to read it. I read, I think, like a little over 70% of this myself, like physical book, and then I ended up listening to the last like 20-ish% just because I was running out of time and school started up again and I had to like drive a few hours back and forth from school. Like my commute's kind of long, so I decided to finish this as an audiobook. And there's so much going on in this novel. Like it's so crazy because I didn't know anything about it going in, and on the back it doesn't really tell you much either. Essentially, like it opens up talking about like it's from Kathy's perspective. So Kathy's like our main character, our narrator, and she's talking about her experience going to this like boarding school and her like childhood essentially. So I'm gonna get into spoiler territory again for this one. If you haven't read this and you plan to, I suggest skipping ahead because I do want to yap specifics with this one too. So wait. Okay, basically this entire book ends up being about like a bunch of clones that are raised in a boarding school, and they're referred to as students, and essentially their whole life purpose and the only reason that they exist is because they are meant to essentially like donate their organs to quote unquote real people. There is so much in this book. There's like obviously questions of like the ethics of doing something like that and the like morality behind, you know, literally like creating people or clones so that you can use their body parts. What's so fascinating about this book is that the clones, which just feels weird referring to them as that because they feel very human, but like I think what's fascinating is that like they don't, and this is coming from me seeing a video literally like 2 nights ago because I think it's been like the 20-year anniversary of the book coming out. It is, because this came out in 2005. But I saw the author was talking about how a lot of people ask him why the like clones or like the main characters in this novel never rebel, and why they're kind of resigned to their fate essentially. And he made this point which I was like, wow, that is so crazy. Like, that is so crazy, but it's true. This point about how like most oftentimes like people, when their circumstances are like shitty, when their circumstances are rough, they don't really rebel, they just make do, they make the best of it, which is really fascinating. And like I think that makes a lot of sense, especially within the like within the realm of this novel. It made so much sense because like when you think about it, these students are literally like raised to know and like understand that like that's what their life goal is. There's a lot of like different details and stuff in this book that I'm not going to really discuss too much, and I think that's like better read yourself. But one thing I do want to touch on, which is at the ending, which is the main reason why I'm giving the little disclaimer, is that towards the end of the novel, so there are like three main characters that you're following. There's Kathy, who's the narrator. There is Ruth, who's basically her best friend. And then Tommy, who is her best friend's boyfriend, and then eventually her own boyfriend. And throughout the novel, Tommy and Kathy specifically are often asking themselves questions about like their circumstances and why things are the way that they are. And for example, like one of the details that they really talk about often is this idea of like the students are often encouraged to create art, and their art is sometimes taken by someone called Madame, who takes it to the gallery. Like, and the students don't really know what's going on. Like, they don't have they don't have a full picture of what's going on. They just see these things happening. And most of them, they don't seem to think about it too much, but Tommy and Kathy do. And so like as the years go on, they hear this rumor after they've left Hailsham, because that's what it's called, the boarding school. But after they leave Hailsham, they hear, her and Ruth and Tommy hear this rumor that like if you can prove that you're in love, your like donations can be deferred. And Tommy comes up with a theory that he tells Kathy that, oh wait, no, pause. Oh, well, actually, is that what happened? Okay, yeah. So Tommy comes up with this theory that he tells Kathy that like the reason that their artwork was so like emphasized, and the reason that some of them were taken, was because it was like a way to prove that two clones essentially were in love with each other, and like so that they could get the deferral. Okay, so that's kind of like where we're at the end of the novel. After like Ruth has died and whatever, Ruth tells Tommy and Kathy that she really wants them to try and get a deferral. Tommy and Kathy, they seek out Madame because they think that that's how they're going to be able to get the deferral for the like donations and stuff. And there's like a whole conversation that they have. They talk about like so many different things about the boarding school. That's actually when you find out, well, no, Miss Lucy tells you earlier on, but this is like when all the cards are laid out about like the whole boarding school, why it existed, why it was different from so many other schools that like the other clones went to. But at one point, Tommy asks Miss Emily, who's one of the guardians, why then, if the rumors about like the two people being in love leading to a deferment, if those are not true, then why were their artworks always taken to the gallery? What was the whole purpose of the gallery then? And Miss Emily tells them that essentially it's because they were having like conventions in the real world to prove that clones deserved better treatment because they were actually like humans with souls. And I have been thinking about that ever since. Like I finished this, I think like 2 weeks ago now. I finished this quite a while ago. And I have been thinking about that ever since, because I truly think that like one of the best proofs of a human soul is artwork, or like what differentiates humans from animals or like anything else in the world that we know of is art. And that just stayed with me, and I think that's something that's legitimately going to stay with me for the rest of my life. Like as a reader, having read this book, like that's going to be the detail that sticks in my brain. I just love this. It's commentary on humanity and what makes us humans, and what proves that we have souls, but also it's commentary on like memory and how what we make of our experiences once we're like 10, 20, 30 years forward and like away from them. And yeah, just all the bits and parts of us that make us human, like both literally and like metaphorically. I really enjoyed this novel much more than I expected to, because I think like towards the beginning it's very slow moving in my opinion, and it also feels like very stream of consciousness, so sometimes you feel like it's like jumping around a little bit, because the way that Kathy narrates this novel, it's like she'll be talking about something and then she'll be like, which reminds me of like when this happened, and then she'll go back to the original thing she was talking about. It very much does feel like someone is like sitting there and telling you their life story, which I appreciated and I really enjoyed about this. It was also really like kind of heartbreaking towards the end, but very quietly so. And the reason I say quietly is because like the character herself, like even though I as a reader, and like most of us I think as readers would be like, oh my god, this is horrifying, like literally at a certain point they're like expected to start giving their organs up until they die, and then after they're dead, whatever else that they can be used of them is going to be used of them. That's just like horrifying. I'm editing right now and I just want to like jump in really quickly and say that when I was saying that it's like horrifying, I mostly mean like without their like explicit consent, like literally the fact that they were created so that their organs would be donated. It's one thing to choose that, it's another thing entirely for them to like be created for that specific purpose, and like they're essentially they have to do it, especially like when you consider the fact that they were requesting a deferral, aka like that signifies that they didn't want to actually like go through with it, or at the very least they didn't want to go through with it at that time. I just want to make that clear. But like she doesn't view it that way, that's just her reality, which is also so crazy, because as I'm saying this, is making me realize like another piece of this is the idea that like things that to us seem like really shocking and whatever might be other people's just normal reality, and like that's just so crazy, like how vast the human experience is. I do think that it took a little more pushing than like other more like quick fast-paced novels and like novels where there's much more going on, but it's very, very worth reading in my opinion, especially in light of like AI, generative AI, which I personally really hate. I think that it is literally an abomination, and I stand with Miyazaki on him saying that it's literally an affront to humanity. But I hate generative AI and AI that like creates any sort of like copy art or tries to create art, because ultimately I think it's just stealing from a bunch of different artists, whether it's writers, painters, animators, etc. That's another thing that's like been immediately on my mind lately, because like with this novel talking about how our souls are so directly tied to art, and the idea and fear of a lot of people, which I think is pretty valid, that AI will slowly replace people making art, it really tears something in my soul, because I'm just like, we should be encouraging people to create more art, whether it's good art or bad art. In my opinion, even bad art is like amazing. Like we need bad books, we need stupid books, we need silly books, and we also need ugly paintings. Like we need the ugly art, quote unquote ugly, as much as we need like the masterpieces. And I just hope that AI doesn't take our souls away. Okay, anyway, that's Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. And if I was gonna say like I learned a lesson from this, it's that like we as humans need to keep making art and push back against other stuff. So that's that. I'm actually surprised this video is much longer than I expected it to be, because like I only read, well, no, I'm not gonna say only, I read 5 books, which compared to other months was less. But again, like I said at the beginning, like I genuinely think that I retained more information for some reason, maybe because I physically read so many of them, and I also read less, so I had more like brain space for them, which is why I don't think reading like a smaller amount of books is a bad thing, because I think it lets you think more about what you're reading. But I also do love reading as much as possible. So anyway, Okay, last but definitely not least is Martyr by Kaveh Akbad. I technically read this in April, because I finished it the first few days of April. But I'm counting it because I want to talk about it. And actually, now that I think about it, because I literally have a vlog coming out later on this month that's going to include this book and 1984. So now, which I've just started reading recently, but now I'm kind of like, maybe I shouldn't talk about this. What do we do? What do we do? Okay, I'm gonna compromise with myself because I really want to talk about this. I just finished it like a day ago, but just briefly, this book follows Cyrus, who is dealing with addiction and alcoholism, and he's an Iranian American. His mother passed away. His mother was killed in a plane accident, and his dad passes away within like a year of him going off to college. He feels very alone, he feels very lost, and he feels like he's very obsessed with death and making sense and meaning of his death, and not necessarily as much his life. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this actually, because I do think that I should wait until my vlog. But this book was so personally incredible for me. I think that like something that I mentioned in my vlog that I think still stands is that I think that I loved this book more because I'm an Iranian American and I could relate to so much of this. I don't know if I didn't have that like bias, I would have loved it as much as I did, because there were some like parts where even I was reading them, I was like, why is this so random? Like, this is a weird book. Like, this is an example of weird, like a weird book to me. I also just loved it. Like, there was so much in this that I related to, that I understood, and that I felt just like talked to a part of me that not a lot of books have, because I don't really know of any other books by Iranian Americans about Iranians in America. I said this in my vlog too, but like, I've read other books by Iranians, but it's never been about Iranians in America, specifically Iranian Americans who like grew up in America, yada yada. So I loved this book. I really enjoyed it, so much so that I wanted to include it in my March wrap up, even though technically I read this in April, or I finished it in April. I mostly read it in March. But yeah, that's Martyr by Kaveh Akbad. I highly recommend it. It is weird. It has weirdness in it. But I think that like beyond that, the parts especially that included like Cyrus specifically were just so, they just touched me so much that like I have to say that I loved it. But yeah, that's that. Let me just show you again my little stack because I'm kind of proud of it. Again, I know that this isn't like that many books necessarily, but I had such a I really had such a great month. And considering that I was fasting the whole time, like I don't know. I think I did good. I think I did good. And, you know, if you've read any of these novels and like what you thought about them, I have a few friends who like some of the books on this list. I talked to them and they didn't really like it. They didn't really like some of them, and I was surprised, but like I respect that. So let me know how you felt about any of these, if you read any of these, and let me know like how your March reading went. Mine actually, like, again, I think I'm repeating myself at this point, but I really did have a great reading month in March, and I'm super excited for April because I have some books, Sunrise on the Reaping, that I am finally going to get to, because I literally like, I've been just so busy, but I don't know, and I say this every month that I'm like, I think I'll have more time this month, but I'm really hoping that I will have more time this month to like log some more of the books that I'm reading. But yeah, thank you for watching, and thank you for like being here, and thank you for your comments, because I've been getting a few more than like usual, and I really love like talking to people about books. I literally like 30 minutes ago maybe rated a book that I just finished, which is technically my first book in April or whatever, and like people were commenting on Fable 2, and I was just like having conversations with strangers about the book, and I loved it. Thank you for watching, and thank you for commenting, and thank you for being here, and I look forward to seeing you guys in another video very soon.